got my phone here, I'm sorry. I forgot to give it.
Richard, I'm thrilled to be sitting here with you. Before you get too comfortable, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind reading to us a little bit from Lazarus Man.
I thought you'd never ask.
We worked on that backstage.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky to set up anything in this book because there are so many characters. Glasses. Thank you. Let's see. Let me find it first. Oh, don't look at it like that. You have the glasses in your hand. Okay, do it. I have to set this up. Okay, so the central event is a building collapse in East Harlem. And there's one guy, after every living creature had been extracted from the building, 36 hours later, they find this guy, and it's like a miracle. And it's a mystery also, and his life was so low, but all of a sudden, having come near death, all he wants to do is live and live and live. And he finds in himself a voice. He just wants to be of service to people. He wants to reach out and tell people, how good it is to be alive. And there's anything that he can do that can help them survive suffering, it's going to come to him. And he becomes like a small celebrity. And he's asked to speak at a funeral for a kid he doesn't know. His name is Reginald White. And Reginald White's family is sitting on one end. It's a crowded church. And he's like a guest star. And he just feels it in his heart. He has so much to say, even though he has no idea what he's going to say until he says it. And this is his speech to the grieving congregation. I have been having trouble with my faith these last few years, Anthony began. In the year past, my mother died of a heart attack, and shortly after that, my father plowed his car into a tree, made it to the hospital, but didn't survive the surgery. Soon afterwards, I found an old cocaine habit that I thought I had discarded. 2 months after that, I lost my job, then lost another one after that. Then I stopped even trying. At first, my wife tried to pull me out of it, tried for months, but I wasn't having it. Finally, she said that I'd changed so much that she didn't know who I was anymore, that I had become a stranger to her. So she left me and took our daughter with her without any resistance coming from me. I felt so low that I didn't even put up a fight for my own child. It was as if a wasp had stung me in my heart, then flew away, leaving his stinger still in me, and in such a way that it was never going to come out for as long as I lived. Reacting to the truth of his own words, he had to pause to get himself recentered, moving forward again. I was never what you would call a religious man, but I was in such despair that I started going back to church, mostly in the afternoons when only a few people or no people were there. I'd sit in the quiet asking God for some kind of help, some kind of guidance, but all I ever got back from him was silence. The morning of the collapse, I was on that street hoping to get hired as a salesman at the High and Mighty Men's Shop, just a few doors down the block. I remember stopping for a moment in front of one of those buildings to straighten the crease of my pants leg. Next thing I know, I'm inside a tremendous roaring cloud, and then I'm in what I thought, in my mind, was my grave. In this very church and others before it, I always left feeling that God either had no interest in me or was done with me because of all my failures. And now he was literally discarding me under tons of debris. They say I had been buried as long as a day, maybe two. But strange as it might seem, in all that time, I never felt afraid and I never despaired. What I did feel down inside that darkness, what I did feel was the presence of a great hand pressing down on me, but also somehow lifting me up. And I knew that that protecting hand was God finally returning all my calls. He wasn't discarding me. He was preparing me for a new life, bringing me up to a new life, a new way of being in the world. As I said before, I've never been a deeply religious individual, and I still don't consider myself one, but I feel guided now. And my purpose in being here today is to deliver to you a message that just might make this young man's death, possible to accept your aching hearts and continue to live the life that he has given you. For a brief moment, he stood there speechless, amazed at what he was about to say. What I have learned since that day in the rubble is that whatever befalls you in life, whatever appears to you as an impossible burden, as an unbearable weight, in the end, if you persevere, if you hold fast, will turn out to be a gift. Whatever befalls you, no matter how heartbreaking or onerous, will turn out to be the best thing, the perfect thing, because of what is to come out of it. In fact, it will be the best thing that could possibly happen to you. And the second small thing, he has an encounter as he's leaving the church. At the end of the service, as Anthony headed up the central aisle with everyone else, a middle-aged black woman stepped out from the shadows just inside the front door and took hold of his arm. "Excuse me, can I ask you something?" "Sure." Anthony not at all sure at all, but feeling that he had no choice, as he was gently but inexorably steered back down the aisle and into a folding chair, the woman releasing his arm as she took the chair next to him. You said the worst thing is the best thing that could possibly happen to you?" "I did." "Okay, then tell me this. I lost my husband last week in that collapse. We were married 22 years, and just like that, he's gone. I never had a fight or a bad day with this man, and our kids loved him. Now I need to start bringing home a paycheck because his pension and life insurance can only go so far. But I can't look for a job, you understand, because 3 of our kids are too young, and right now they need me around the clock. And so does my mother, who lives with us and can't do anything for herself. My guess is we're going to lose the apartment, and I'm going to have to send 2 of my kids to live with relatives in Atlanta. As far as my mother goes, I can't think of a single thing to do with her that wouldn't speed her death. So tell me this. How is all what I just told you going to be turned out to be the best thing that could ever happen to me?" "I'm sorry about your husband," Anthony said numbly, not knowing what else to say. The woman brushed that off, waiting for more. "Maybe God," Anthony began, then stopped because he had no idea how to complete the sentence. "Maybe God what?" she said. "I don't know," his voice down to a hush, then half-heartedly added, "Nobody knows. It happens when it happens. I guess you just have to believe that it will." Hearing himself a preening fraud, a self-aggrandizing con man. "You came out of that building alive. Why couldn't my husband? What's so special about you?" Then rising out of her chair, "God has a plan for me," turning into the aisle. "Well, I don't want it." When he attempted to leave the church again, he was accosted again. Reginald White's grandmother coming out of nowhere to grab him up in her arms. "I heard that you were a teacher," looking up at him with her damp, bulging eyes. "I was." No, was, she said, shaking him like a tree. "You are." Thank you. Okay.
So Richard, here you are, 10 books deep into a catalog that we record buffs like to call all killer, no filler.
Thank you.
And throughout your novels, there's this peculiar but insistent, almost romance that I feel. It has one foot in like Zola, as Lucas mentioned, or that terrible Tom Wolfe essay. But there's also something of like almost like a Hubert Selby Jr., kind of like poetic side to what you're doing. It's not a romance of personal aggrandizement, but an idea that writing can do something, can like wake us up if it gets down to what's really real. How were you imagining your writing and your life as a writer when you started out? Because The Wanderers you published when you were like 25 or something, right?
24.
So, how were you thinking about this writing life? What did you think it would be like? What did you want to do?
I wrote about what I knew about, which is growing up in a housing project that I only left 3 or 4 years earlier. And so my memories were still wet. And I was at Stanford in the writing program, which I lasted 3 months because I didn't have a car and I didn't know anything. Pine needles, bicycles, tires. And in that time, I knew I was never going to go back to the Bronx. And I wanted to hold on to it in some way because I knew I was never going back there. And all of a sudden I had this urge to recreate my life, but not like social realism, more like I always say, as if the teenagers I knew met at a reunion 40 years later and were hammered and were telling each other, oh, remember that time Joey Z, oh yeah, that's when he climbed a tree and he fell out and he killed a cow, yeah. Oh yeah, I love that. You know, they're telling stories, they're trying to mythologize their own existence. And that's what I was trying to do. And it was the first time in my life I felt like I had something, a story. Before that, it was just window dressing. I was a very clever writer, I was witty, but nothing was driving me on the inside. And that was the first time something was driving me on the inside. And I kind of stuck with that feeling. Find what you love, find what you know, but you love and you want to recreate it and share it. Problem with that is that 4 books, I'm 32 years old, I don't know anything more. I'm done, you know. And that's when I went 8 years, I did screenplays. And in those 8 years, there were remarkable changes in my life. I became married, I had 2 daughters. I started making money. I wasn't alone, I had a social life, all these crazy people that loved my stuff but didn't like it because it's not going to make money. But I had a conversation with other people. And then when Clockers came around, I realized I finally saw something that triggered in me the connection between housing projects, a cocaine problem that I had for a couple of years that almost killed me. I was just sniffing coke. And these were the days when crack just first appeared. And crack was like, made coke look like kryptonite. I mean, crack was kryptonite, making coke feel like, dandruff. And once again, for the first time, I felt this haunted connection between my frightened dreams of being an addict, what had happened to the projects in the crack time, and same bricks that were the buildings that I grew up with. And I just wanted to, and the police, because with the police, when you're with police, you have access to humans' behavior that you would never see ever before or on yourself, because when you're with police witnessing human behavior in such extremis that police are required. And it's not about I love police or I don't love police or defund the police or refund the police. It's about where they were my chariots that with them I started seeing all the tectonic plates under the sidewalk. And I just had that burning desire to write again.
So Clockers was, so you had the 4 books. Oh, you said you knew you were never going back to the Bronx. Mm-hmm. What did you mean when you said that? Like,
my life was going to go forward. I was not going to live in a housing project anymore. I was not going to romanticize where I came from. I'd seen not much, college. I started living in Manhattan. That was where I came from. That was the farm for me. But now I'm in gay Paris.
And those were the first 4 novels is you sort of mining that material of the Bronx that you came out of. So the way you're talking, it's like Clockers was almost a turning point.
It was. Most importantly in Clockers, I left myself out.
And most of us don't, just find ourselves hanging out with the police. So how did that, or if we're lucky, how did that happen? Like, take us into that.
It's just, that's such a long-winded story, but I'll try to make it in under an hour. I came up with an idea for this movie, Sea of Love, which came out with Al Pacino, but I didn't know anything about it. I've never even saw like a handgun on someone's hip before, but I like research, and this is part of how Hollywood took me out of myself, because I was forced to learn what it was like to be a hustler, full hustler, what it was like to be a cop, what it was like to be whatever the subject was. I had to learn it. They were paying me. And I learned that I could learn. And it was so liberating that they always say, write what you know. And what you know is that in college, write what you know. Well, what you know is you're bummed out when you go home for Christmas break. When you go back on Thanksgiving, your girlfriend dumped you. And you love your parents, but you hate your parents, and had a fight. I can't wait to get out of here. And that's what you know. But what I discovered, and what I had to teach them, is that what are you interested in? What are you curious about? Embrace that. Go out and learn about that, and that becomes part of what you know. And keep going out and keep going out, and what you know keeps expanding, expanding. And you don't have to be a scholar about the things that you're curious about. You just have to know more than you know. And it's fiction. You can make things up. But the point is, after Clockers, I realized urban panoramas are my thing. And I just embraced that in all the books that came, including this book. Oh, where is that? It's down there. Lazarus Man. I live in Harlem, and I don't want to live anywhere else. Not because it's exotic. It's certainly not exotic. But it's old and it's new. It's not about, well, I'm a white guy in a traditional black land. It's about the people that are willing to talk to you. And people that, there's a lot of people that have Southern backgrounds, and they have that Southern air of politeness. People, it's not like Midtown where everybody's like walking past each other like they're all alone. You nod at someone, they're going to nod back. If you say, how are you? They're going to say, fine, and how are you? I remember the first time when I moved to West 118th, there was a woman that was always on the street, and she was a little bit of a panhandler. And when I left the house with my wife, we were walking past her, and I had that downtown attitude. Just walked past. She said, good morning. And I didn't say anything. 2 steps later, she said, good morning, you're supposed to say. And all of a sudden, I jumped out of my shoes. Oh, good morning, how are you? Where are you from? Do you have kids? And she said, now that's more like it. And you just learn, a neighborhood is not just where you live, it's the people that live around you. And it's a community that I've never had before. I've lived in more upscale places, but nothing there. No, I don't want to be a reverse snob about this, but there's nothing that was feeding me. There was nothing that was triggering anything in me. And being among people that demanded that you address them, it was great.
So you moved to Harlem, what year?
2008.
Okay, and you told me that this book's gestation, let's say, dates to 2008.
It does.
But the central event, which you just read about to us, happens in 2014. So what did you have in 2008 of the book?
I had the notion that I had just written Lush Life, which was about sort of a panoramic view of the Lower East Side at the moment where gentrification was happening. It was like the gentrification, where you take traditional poor families, immigrant families, and all of a sudden you thrust all these NYU graduates in there, playing poverty, and rents go up, realtors start smelling cappuccino, everybody gets out. Even the people that broke the neighborhood get out because they can't afford it. But I was trying to write about, when I said tectonic plates, the tensions in that area, but it was like this. And I had a vague idea of wanting to do the same thing with East Harlem, or Harlem, West Harlem, East Harlem, Central Harlem. But I just got, everything I saw, because I'd never lived there before, the first year, everything was like, wow. But you can't write, wow. And you had to live there, even though you had to let life happen to you. You had to get all your wows out. You had to settle down, and you had to calm down, and your nuances and keener observations will come. Wow has to become routine. And you got to live, it's like, when I said to creative writing students, what can I tell you? How to be 15 years older than you are? What else can I tell you? You don't know enough. You don't live enough. If I had a pill that would make you 35, then maybe I did something for you. But it was the same thing for myself. I didn't know anything. And I had to do the same thing. I had to, unfortunately there was no pill. And it took years until I felt like I wasn't a tourist. And I could write with knowledge about certain things.
And then this building collapse happens. And I remember this, it's 2014, I was saying backstage, I was commuting up to Sarah Lawrence one day a week to teach on the Metro North. And this was for anyone who's around, this is a fairly major story for the city for a while.
Yeah, until the next week when a building in a wider area collapsed.
And it was caused by, this is the one that was caused by like an illegal gas hookup, right?
Yeah, no, there was that's what happened in the East Village. This one, it was just Con Ed, there's a gas leak. And in fact, the Con Ed people had just left the building like an hour earlier. And
what did you do?
Well,
where were you?
I was on 129th Street where I lived, so it's 13 blocks north, and I just felt the vibrations. I could feel it in my jawline, and just out of reflex, what the hell happened? And I went down there because what my wife Lorraine Adams had introduced me to as a journalist and a novelist is reporting your novel, going out, learning something, absorbing it, and shaping it into something that's art. And so I didn't know what was down there. I mean, I assumed it was a building collapse. And I just went down there and it just became part of that mass chaos for a while. But even then, I didn't say, aha, now I have the horse that I'm gonna ride through this complicated landscape. It just evolved. It was years. I couldn't figure it. I always say, like, I had the street, but I didn't have the house.
Did you see anyone you knew when you went down to check out what was happening on the street? Like, did you see familiar faces, neighbors you knew?
No, because it was a different, like New York, if you live 10 blocks away from someone else, they live in a different country than your country. Like you were talking about somebody who moved 8 blocks away from where they used to live. And at one point they went back to visit the old laundromat. And a woman there said, "Oh my God, it's you. I thought we would never see you." He lived 8 blocks away. But that's what New York is. Every time you move, it's like you're moving to a different city. You can live in New York and visit the world.
So how did this, when you look at the novel now, this novel of Harlem, relative to what you thought you were setting out to do in 2008, what surprises you about it, or what did you not see coming, or how did it turn out differently than you?
What did I...
Like, so you have this idea.
When they had this raw concept of doing something.
You're going to do Lush Life, but
like a panoramic thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew nothing. Just that I wanted to do it, and it was an area that I felt excited about being part of. But, just because you're excited doesn't make you an artist.
Let me put this to you a different way. There's for me as a reader, and a longtime reader of yours, what surprised me about it, in the best possible way, is that there's a sweetness to the novel. Now you've got, some. I call you the poet laureate of the amicable divorce. All of your novels are sort of shot through with moments of human tenderness, but there's a real kind of suffusing warmth to the picture of the place. Some of the more caustic side of like Freedom Land or something has kind of mellowed away, and it left me feeling like it was this was something.
I feel like I'm an older writer now. I was always an older writer each book, but now I'm 75, and I was joking. I just said, 75. That's like, what do you get for a 75th wedding, traditional wedding gift? Plutonium, yellow cake. Or the 75 has to do with Kentucky. Or the 75th running of, it's like I only have 50 years left, and my life in the last 20 years, I just myself had calmed down, and I experienced more peacefulness in my life, and before I had this anxiety that I have to grab people. I have to blow their minds away with how fantastic and wow, you got to read this. I just didn't feel that anymore. I just felt like my life had more parts equal, greater than the reception of a novel. And I guess I just wanted to lay back and write about people being people. And there's no like crazy reveal at the end. Everything goes out with I don't want to say with a whimper, not a bang, or whatever how I misquoted that. But no, I was like avoiding big bang revelations, big bang writing. I just wanted people to be who they are.
It's almost like the downbeats in the other novels. You're out with cops and they're kind of like wide-eyed, sleepless, and trying to solve a crime, and then you have little moments, downbeats at home. It's almost like the proportions are inverse.
I started being more interested in stuff that's not to the point of the central event of the book, which is the building collapse. It's about 4 people who were there in various capacities: a community affairs officer, a broke-ass funeral director who's looking for business, a kid living next door, 24, who lives with a camera around his neck, and and Lazarus, the guy Anthony that they recover like a miracle, and people jumped on that because it was like the beautiful coda at the end of a horrible tragedy, a survivor, and what his life was like, and how he had transformed himself after that, just out of sheer gratitude for being alive and feeling an urge to reach out and to share and to just alleviate people's pain. I was more interested in the quiet moments.
Well, let's talk about each of those characters in turn for a second. When I was hearing you read Anthony's speech, I'd seen it on the page, but I was really struck as you read. There was something I could feel something that seemed resonant for you as you read. Like you said, having come so close to death. This is you talking, introducing the piece. He wants to live and live and live. Mm-hmm. Where does Anthony's experience? This is the guy. He's a recovering cokehead. He's lost his wife and his stepdaughter without a fight, as he points out, and he's lost a couple of jobs. Where does his experience touch yours, or how did you find your way into him?
I feel like oftentimes my main character is some kind of middle-aged mope, who feels like life. He's gray. He's a gray person, and so it's not like it touched mine, but
Have you had a near-death experience? Have you had a near-death experience?
No, well, I never was under a building, but no, I didn't. No, I had slow near-death experiences, AKA doing cocaine, which is God's way of telling, no, death is God's way of telling you to slow down. But I never had any kind of like, oh my God, I'm alive. You know, not like that, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic.
Even after getting off coke? You didn't have that when you got off coke? Oh my God, I'm alive.
Oh, I did, but you know, that's like an AA. You have the pink cloud, that euphoria that drunks get when alcohol is leaving their system, and all of a sudden the world's a new place with pink cloud. I didn't think I'd ever stop, and then my wife, at that time in 1984, we came back from a trip, and I was terrified. I went to Italy because I thought, well, I don't know how to get coke in Italy, so you know, this is one way. I'm putting myself in a situation to not do it.
That's good addict thinking right there. That's good addict thinking.
Yeah.
I'll go to Italy.
Clever Irishman I am. And all of a sudden, everything changes. There's blue skies. I re-fell in love. I actually ate a meal to the end without going to the bathroom in the middle. If I did go to the bathroom, I really had to go to the bathroom this time. I learned how to walk. I learned how to talk. I learned how to conversate. And when we got back to New York, I realized, you know, all I have to do is make one phone call, and here I am again, you know, fucked up cokehead. And my wife came in and just, she did, I would say 3 words, but one is contracted. She said, I'm pregnant. That was it. Now, next, cigarettes. How do I get off cigarettes? But that's all it took. Because I was so wrapped up in my own misery, somebody says something that demands something of you that you feel like you haven't been able to give to anybody because you're so, you know, self-miseried. And that's how I got off.
And I feel like that's actually kind of resonant with Anthony's experience. I mean, he's like, you said he's a middle-aged mope. The guy in Samaritan's a little bit like that too.
They're all like that, whiny asshole.
But and it's this kind of, and they're very, you make them very endearing in this interesting way.
Well, you better, because otherwise people are going to stab a knife through that book.
But
this creep again.
There is this kind of self-absorption to it. I mean, the misery is the self-absorption, and the self-absorption is about the misery. And what we're seeing him do is have these experiences of feeling like he might be able to do something for somebody else, and it like pulls him out of himself.
Yeah, at the same time, yes, and he becomes, like in my books, if you have a mope, you better be unmoped by the end of the book, you know, or you better like unlist your phone number. I mean, the whole thing is, I wanted to give these people that thought they were no exit an exit, and it didn't have to be a big exit, it's just they found something that takes them out of themselves, and that's good enough. But for Anthony, it's more conflicted because there are rumors about his miraculous survival, and he knows the rumors, he knows what happened, and so he's wrestling with himself all the time because what he feels is genuine, but is his story genuine? But nonetheless, he feels this change in him, and he does have things to give to people. But at one point, Mary Rowe, the detective, is driving him home, and she looked at him and he said, "He looks like he's wrestling with demons and he's losing." Every day, it's like a knot for him because it's glory and it's a secret.
So I'm going to talk about Mary in a minute, but mope number 2 is the funeral home director.
He's not a mope. He's a wise guy.
He's a wised-up mope.
Yeah.
Well, he's got that thing. He's like, maybe he dreamed of a grander.
More dead bodies.
Yeah. Then he's running. I was particularly interested in the level of research you did for this. There's a scene where he goes, you know, it's almost a montage. He's got to like go for various complicated plot reasons. He's got to quickly, bury some bodies. So he's going into apartment buildings, he's getting calls like someone died in this apartment building, you got to go in. And you walk us through, what that is. How much did you make up, and how much did you ride
I'd
along?
say half and half. I mean, I did. I hung out. Like, I learned to love. And so I reached out to a couple of funeral directors up there. And, I even did a ride-along with a dead body. And you got to go very slow, even if the car's around, you're going fast. Because if you go over 20 miles an hour and all of a sudden you got to stop, that coffin's going to go flying to the side of the back of the limo. But I love to know the nuts and bolts of things, but I don't want to be like this middlebrow James Michener, like, oh, do you know how Hawaii was formed? It was a volcanic thing. It's like going to your supermarket encyclopedia that's on a spin rack. A to C this week, next week D to F. 99 cents.
There's a wonderful scene that one of the funniest things in the book, and I never thought about it before, but if you've got someone who's died on the 6th floor of an elevator building, a body's got to come down in the elevator. Well, there are other people in the building who want to use the elevator.
Yeah,
and you learn some things about your neighbors based on what they did.
And you think about the family that's outside the room, so you're cocooning them up. But then you always bring two things, and it's the details I love. You bring either an American flag or a velour or kind of half-assed luxury bedspread, because nobody wants to see their grandfather come out in a body bag. So you bring the flag and you ask them, was he in the service? So you put him in the flag for whatever. And it's all about the folks and not freaking out the folks as much as you can. But it's all this little stuff, and sometimes I get rapture of the deep with all the details. And then what you do is, okay, you got the left side over. Now you got to roll the tarp, and then you got to pull the body over, and then you got to pull it to you, and then you got to get the cotton thing. And make sure you have plugs in your nose. But it's not about the details. It's about details is not art. Details is reporting. It's like you learn stuff for a term paper. It's the shaping of who is doing this. How does this impact them, which is much more important.
So I picked out a little passage about Royal that I'm wondering if you can read that's just exemplary of what you just said. I can imagine you getting rapture of the deep in the details because they are so great, but then kind of pulling them together and synthesizing them into a little like mini symphony. This is, if you could just, the bottom of page 32, starting with back in the late 1980s.
To when?
To the page break.
Oh, boy. Okay, here we go. And
so this is Royal.
Get around, boys and girls. So his place is crap. He needs 6 bodies a month to make his nut. And he's lucky if he gets 4. So his place looks like a dump. It wasn't always like this. Back in the late 1980s, all through the 90s, and for a few years in the 2000s, when between the crack-fueled violence, the cocaine turf wars, and AIDS, a time when he could count on 3 to 4 bodies a day, and sometimes even have to farm out the overflow to subcontractors, he had, relative to now at least, money to burn. On the recommendation of his cousin, a funeral director in Mississippi, he hired a high-strung white kid from Tavares, Florida, a sign painter for Walmart by trade, who'd never been north of Georgia, to come up to Harlem and for $5,000 plus room and meals, paint an original Last Supper for the parlor, the only proviso being that it had to be twice as big as the 2 other Last Suppers that hung in the neighboring Carolina Chapel and the House of Solace. It took the kid, Ellis Trimble was his name, 2 months to get it done. The result was pretty good, except that Royal had wanted Jesus and the apostles to be black. Although in unfairness to the artist, he might have forgotten to mention that. When he gave the late-breaking news to Ellis, the kid flipped out, bolted from the parlor, and was never seen again, not even returning for his end money. which Royal would have given him a somewhat hard time about, since in his eyes, the Last Supper was still shy a few courses. So using the money that Ellis had left on the table, he hired one of his estranged brother's sons, a graffiti artist of some reputation, to redo the faces, which also came out surprisingly well, except that this superstar street artist had forgotten about the apostles' hands, which remained white. In the end, Royal wound up selling the damn thing online for half of what he paid for it.
I want to say you can't make this stuff up, but you probably
you do, yeah, you better. Can I just have a break for 5 seconds? I'm just going to sit here. I just want to wish happy birthday to one of the most important people in my writing life, Mr. Lazar. I would call him by his full name, Myron Lazar, but he was my 7th grade English teacher, and so he's always going to be Mr. Lazar. Happy birthday, Myron.
So that's Anthony, who is the Lazarus of the title, and Royal, the funeral home director. The kid who grabs the camera at the moment of the explosion and goes out on the street is Felix, and he does what you did.
I am a camera, yeah.
And then there's Mary Rowe, the detective. And I just wanted to you alluded to this earlier, but I wanted to kind of circle back and just ask you about the fascination of cops.
They see things that you can never see. Like I said, they invited me into their house of experience when they didn't have to, and for that, I'm grateful. But many people in many walks of life have invited me into their house of life. And I'm also grateful to them, too. It's just the world that their day is not like your day. Sometimes it's more boring, if that's possible. And it's I don't know. When I first got ride-alongs with cops, I was mind-blown. You're a policeman. Like I said, I'd never even seen a gun on somebody's hip. So you carry death on your hip. Every day is life and death. And they're going like this, So let me ask you a question, Rich. When you're working on a movie, do you call him Bob, Bobby, Robert, or Mr. De Niro? And it was just like, we do this. This is our job. What you do is wow. No, what you do is wow. And it was just, and the other main thing is always buy the drinks.
Did you find on this ride, were those in New York?
No, this is in Jersey City.
Okay.
Hudson County, New Jersey.
And did you find, by virtue of growing up in the Bronx, and you said it was a Jewish and Catholic housing project?
Jewish, Catholic, African American, maybe West Indian, much less so Hispanic.
Did you find that you had you already had some kind of common language that you spoke with these guys?
Yes and no. I mean, listen, we occupied the same elevators. We ate dinner on top of each other in our stacked apartments. We're in the same homerooms, in school. But there was something that happened. At some point, you don't know the difference between him and you. And then once you get to a certain age, and it's not a very late age, maybe 8 or 9, race becomes a self-conscious issue. And all of a sudden, you're not hanging out with him anymore, and he's not hanging out with you. I remember I got in touch with this woman who's now retired, who was a kid, and I would have lived in 3B, and she lived in, I'm sorry, I feel like Pence. Or no, Anthony Perkin, that wouldn't hurt him. And so, I mean, we saw each other just about every day somewhere. And I showed her a scrapbook I had of Parkside, and she showed me her scrapbook. And 99% of the people in my scrapbook were white. 99% of the people in her scrapbook were black. And we grew up in the same building, so how much did anybody know about the other?
But do you feel like that gave you, I feel like the cops that you write about in the tri-state area are kind of from the same, kind of like outer borough?
Yeah, well, yeah, sure.
Milieu.
Long Island, Riverhead, or, I mean, working class families. And, the kids I grew up with, some went to college and became, solidly middle class or professionals. Some joined the Army, some joined the police force, some got good union jobs with a strong union. There was it was like a lazy Susan of where people went from the projects. And so, I didn't know any police per se, but, I know the kids that I knew growing up could very well possibly have become police.
And what about, so Mary, I think, is your third, but possibly more, woman cop. How do you kind of think your way into her experience? And this is like very, very kind of still macho world.
I am Madame Bovary. This is just a human being. Just because you're not a woman, that doesn't mean you don't know anything about women. Just because you're white, that doesn't mean you don't know anything about being non-white. It's called using your imagination, creating people. And I just felt, I don't know, it's not like I'm going to put in a woman and I'm going to show people how sensitive I am. Maybe I can get laid. It's just, it just felt natural to me. That's the problem I have with this territorial thing. You can't write about those people because you're privileged and you can't write about this. Then I always feel like, well, if I can't write about being gay, I don't want to see any gay people writing about straight people. If I can't write about women, I don't want any women to write about men. It sucks because you wind up writing in a phone booth and your great work will be about your shoes.
And the last thing I wanted to ask before we get questions from the audience is just about the God stuff, which is interesting. Even in what you read, it's like Lazarus Man, Samaritan as titles, but particularly in what you read, like this book and these characters have, I don't say they have like religion in their lives, but like the question of faith is in their lives in a way that's a lot of writers don't put in books right now. Where does that come from?
Gratitude for being alive. But he's also conflicted about the circumstances of his delivery. And when he gets freaked out, he decided it was God's will. And then he said, no, God had nothing to do with it. I did something. But then he gets scared and he said, well, it's up, God did it. He's God. What can I do? He put me there. I put me there. He put me there. I put me there. But it's about characters yearning to look up instead of down and wanting to be something more, something intangible, something that will lead to a sense of greasy grace. I don't know how else to put it.
All right, I have some questions here from the audience, one of which anticipated one that I didn't get to. And you'll like this because it repeats the line from earlier. You've been called the greatest writer of dialogue.
Well, it's like
living
I have
or
a target
dead.
on me.
End quote. Who are your top 5 writers of dialogue? Screenwriters, novelists, living?
Well, I would say you can have, first of all, there's a big difference between writing for people to speak, like in a movie, and writing for the eyes to be read. You can have magnificent dialogue, ironic, sardonic, humorous, dazzling on the page. Like Don DeLillo asked one of the great dialogue writers, my favorite all-time dialogue writer in a novel is George Higgins, who's a Boston prosecutor, and he wrote a series of crime novels. And his work just blew me away. I don't have a top 5. I think I'm supposed to say Henry Green. the British novelist, but I don't speak British, so I can't appreciate all what people say. But if I did, I'd probably, oh yeah, Henry Green. It's tricky. I don't really have a list. I'd say George Higgins for sure. Yeah.
On this topic of lists, do you have any Harlem writers who you're reading when you were working on the book that you admire?
Well, I've read a lot. I've always read African American literature, starting in college or starting in high school. And you go through periods: James Baldwin, period; Richard Wright, period; Leroy Jones, period. I forgot when he adapted his name to something else.
Amiri Baraka.
Amiri Baraka, sorry. I had to put the ammo to show you I really knew. Then you read Nella Larson, Passing. Toni Morrison, there's a grounder. Gail Jones, who is not many people speak about her anymore, but I thought she was a great writer.
Great dialogue.
She's not a Harlem. The thing my wife told me, because she's researching Harlem, is that when you look at the characters from the Harlem Renaissance, only maybe one or two of them was actually from Harlem. I mean, people in the 20s beforehand and maybe into the 30s gravitated, black writers and black artists gravitated to Harlem because it was the epicenter of black culture at that time. But there's a whole bunch of Southerners.
I just ask because there's the scene where Anthony's in church. He kind of wanders into a church, and there's it's not quite an altar call, but it's a storefront church, and the woman is sort of
she's a prophetess,
giving a sermon that really is going straight to Anthony, and it really reminded me of little moments in Go Tell It on the Mountain for some reason.
Well, I read Go Tell It on the Mountain when I was like 14. And I didn't have all the equipment to appreciate the nuances or to pick up the sexual tension in it. But it riveted me because he was writing about cement. He was writing about streets. And that's what I responded to. Like I said, I was a kid. So most of what made it great probably slipped by. But, you go to school, in a public school, Board of Education, New York City, you're going to read Silas Marner. You're going to read Oedipus. You're going to read Mark Twain. You're going to read this one. You're going to read Charles Dickens. You're going to read, who knows? But what you're not going to read is people like you, at least at that time. I'm talking about the early 60s. And I just felt like at the end of all that reading, I just felt like you have to be like a dead Englishman to get published. I never saw anything akin to my experience, in a book. And so that's what I responded with Claude Brown, Perry Thomas, James Baldwin. And then Hubert Selby came along, and he put jazz in language. But it's, once again, I've been saying this for 50 years. All of a sudden I realized that my experience is valid grounds for literature. I don't have to own a horse.
Do you ever write something without seeing the place it's happening in? Which I think means like going there and being there on the ground.
Oh, you mean like an essay? Or no. With my fiction, that was the problem with my first 4 books, where I just felt like I was in a straitjacket afterward. I wasn't expanding the world. I wasn't giving myself an opportunity to learn. And once you do that, that's a drug. That's crack for me. You just always want to be out. You always want to be on the street. You always feel like, I want to know more. I want to know more. You're still alive. You're still growing. You're still a student. And I never want to not be a student. My wife and I talk about this all the time. The hope, there's no plateau. There's no, okay, you're here. There's no here. It's climbing. Sometimes the climbing is pretty easy because you're getting older, but it's this feeling of being alive because you're learning something. And just because you learned it, that doesn't make it art. The challenge is to go home and think about this and stew about this. And then maybe a year later, you're writing something, and, oh, I know what this character would be doing right now. And you're thinking of something that you saw, or a conversation you had with somebody a year earlier. And I would have stacked notebooks in the beginning, writing down observations, this, that, the other, dialogue, bon mots, malamotes, mamalutes. And I had a pile like this of stenographers' notebooks for clockers, and I never opened one of them. I mean, they were like a talisman. It was like a big thing that said, "You go, girl." And because I figured, if it was really that important to me, if it was really something that meant something to me, I would remember it. And if I didn't remember it, I never went through the books. Oh, I forgot this one. That one, that guy said that.
Right.
It's just what sticks with you. You just got to take everything in.
And the last question is, how does the process of writing a novel, easy one, softball, how does the process of writing a novel differ from the process of writing for TV for you?
You got to be kidding me. You write a novel, it's all you. You write for television or film, it's a collaboration. You're a hired pen. You need the money. That doesn't mean you can't have a good time or you can't write well, but you have to answer to people, and you have to write something that they want. You can't go off and all of a sudden, I wonder as I wander. No, baby, we got 120 minutes here. How are people going to turn in for episode 2 if you leave this stuff in episode 1 at the end? It's like shit. What do you mean it's shit? It's deathless. I remember Hubert Selby told me a story about he always wanted to make movies. And he finally got a chance when some Hollywood producer wanted to do a series on the Ten Commandments. And he hired writers. He farmed out, right? I want to do Thou Shalt Not Kill, please, please, please. I want to do Do Not Look at Thy Neighbor's Wife. Oh, boy, I know that one. And because he was religious, but like Christian, but not of a church, he did honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Because nobody, what the hell is that? Where people going to shul? Oh, that's exciting. Somebody's yarmulke fell off. But he wrote in his heart, and he told me, so I had to go in, the producer read it. I walk into his office. He sees me. He jumps up on his desk. He's now standing on his desk. Hello, genius. Hello, the genius of all writers. The genius who wrote this genius script that'll never get made, and let me tell you why.
All right. Well, so now we know how to write for TV.
Yeah. Do what they say, but do it better.
Thank you so much to Richard Price for gracing us with your presence and your book. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.